On today's show, Media Day is in the books. Damian Lillard has spoken as a Milwaukee Bucks player for the first time. We're going to discuss the interesting points there. Giannis did discuss a contract extension a little bit. So what do we take from Giannis's words today? And even Khris Middleton, the idea of his health status coming into this season. It was nice to hear from Khris. So plenty to break down from Media Day. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Bucks. My name's Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on this show Monday to Friday, and also find my work over at ESPN. And alongside me, the founder of brewhoop.com and longtime voice of the podcast, Frank Madden, for today's post-Media Day show, which means that now, I guess, officially we can get stuck into the season, but there's plenty to talk about. We appreciate everyone making Locked On Bucks your first watch or first listen of every day. It's been a massive few days for the channel, which has got me rejuvenated and excited for the basketball season coming up. There's some fresh faces playing on the Bucks, and I think everyone, whether you're old Bucks fans, new Bucks fans, whether you're Portland fans that are just interested in what's going on in Milwaukee, or you're a Boston Celtics fan that wants to jump in the comments and talk a little bit of trash, it's been a fun couple of days for the channel for sure, and we appreciate everyone that's been a part of it. So if you haven't done so yet, subscribe and turn the notifications on. Drop a comment, a like, and review, and do all those things. It's free to do, and I think Locked On Bucks is going to be a fun place to hang out for the fans this year. Media Day in the books, though, and obviously we've discussed Damian Lillard a lot over the last few days, Frank, and I think it's been exciting. But today's another step when you get to see Dame in the uniform. He fronts a lot of the local media and answers a lot of the questions that I think we all had coming into today. So when you see Damian Lillard in the photos alongside Brook Lopez and Khris Middleton, new head coach Adrian Griffin, it gets you a little bit excited. How did you think Damian Lillard handled the day? Because I assume coming into the day he knew a lot of the questions that were going to come.
Yeah, I mean, I think still surreal to see Dame Lillard in that Bucks zero jersey, right? I mean, this was like the ultimate win for like NBA Instagram Photoshop wishcasters. Think of all the like random photoshops over the years, and like how many times, like, based on no context over the last few years, like, there's like random photoshops of Dame in a Bucks jersey, like somebody would post it and be like, all right, but I mean, whatever, like he's not coming to Milwaukee. And then he came to Milwaukee, and here we are. And yeah, it's still surreal. I mean, it'll be surreal to see Jrue Holiday in a Celtics jersey. But I think we can focus on the fun of seeing Dame Lillard in Milwaukee. And I think he carried himself like you'd expect Dame Lillard to carry himself, right? I mean, I think he was you can tell it's been a process for him to get to the point of like being like, all right, I'm really leaving Portland, right? And not just because he didn't go to Miami, but just leaving Portland for anywhere, I think was going to be an adjustment process. And especially with Milwaukee, I mean, the Bucks were not a team that we thought would be in this position, right? And so we were all shocked. And so I think we can accept that Damian Lillard was also, pretty surprised. And I think he did let on that about 2 weeks before the trade, there was some conversation basically saying that, like, hey, they were, open to coming to Milwaukee, that, this was not going to be a situation where he didn't want to come to the Bucks. But, I think, again, I think we've still been seeing him in some respect kind of process all of this in real time. And, I think for all the Bucks as well, there's been that process as well. And like every Buck, that came on stage today, whether it was Giannis, Khris, Brook, everybody, right? Like everybody had to sort of balance this excitement for Dame with this respect for Jrue Holiday and the acknowledgement of what the Bucks were going to miss with Jrue Holiday no longer being here. So, it was kind of an interesting day in that regard, right? You had Wes Eden sort of starting the day off saying this is the most excited that, he and ownership has been coming into a season. And obviously, I think probably fitting in a lot of ways that ownership was kicking off today. I mean, they usually do, right? But given, I think, what this move said about ownership's commitment to giving the Bucks the best chance possible to win a championship, showing Giannis the commitment level. We'll talk about that in a moment, since that maybe is the biggest headline in some ways, coming out of this in terms of Giannis and his comments. But yeah, I mean, again, I think it's okay that Damian Lillard isn't like, just smiling ears to ear
Of course.
and whatever, right? Like it's. I think he's happy to be here. I think there was another later article after interview that he did with Chris Haynes, who obviously he's very close with. And they talked a little bit about just sort of, literally how they were texting about this after the trade went down, and conversations that they had immediately thereafter. And, I think the big takeaway was Dame's comment that, like, he's in the right place, and so I think, again, I could do without. I mean, every athlete, Giannis does it too. Like, everybody always like gives Milwaukee these backhanded compliments about like being like, oh, there's not a lot of Giannis did it again today. Like, oh, there's like, it's great because there's not a lot of distractions. It's like, okay, you're just calling our city boring, dude. Like, can you work a little bit harder to talk about like the actual cool things that Milwaukee has going for it? So anyway, there was still a little bit of that, right? Like, Damian Lillard acknowledged, like, normally when he's been here, he's been in a hotel, and it's been snowing and not exactly ideal. So it was nice. It was nice we at least got some acknowledgement that Milwaukee is, a beautiful place in the fall months, and hopefully Damian Lillard gets to experience mid-June basketball in Milwaukee next year, with a deep finals run and all that, and he gets to see what it's like when it's actually warm in Milwaukee. But yeah, I mean, again, I thought it was, largely par for the course from kind of what I think we probably expected. I don't know, anything stand out to you? Any surprises from at least like the Dame piece in particular? I don't know if there were any big surprises, but again, that's a lot of that's just because Dame's a polished guy. He's been through this before, and I think obviously he had a plan on how he wanted to address everything.
No, I think it was pretty standard stuff in terms of what I expected from him. But the one thing that I did think was cool, I like seeing the human side of it, and I think you're exactly right. I don't give a crap about all this, whether it's Miami fans, Boston, whoever it is, saying that, gee, he's not smiling too much. I couldn't care less. Out of all the superstars that have played in different cities and now have been traded or whatever, the one thing that just shines through absolutely clearly is how much Damian Lillard cares about Portland, and the fact that even when he made the trade request to Miami, this was not a decision that he came to lightly, and he's been there for over a decade. And he's discussed with Chris Haynes, and this is perhaps what I thought was the most interesting. He discussed with Chris Haynes the idea of how 4 or 5 years ago, maybe he wasn't ready to make this move, and he didn't feel like he had done everything he could in Portland, and maybe he mentally wasn't prepared to make a move at this stage in his career. But the one thing that clearly came through is how desperate he is to win. And I think that he did a pretty good job of explaining how it went from real shock to then, okay, this is happening. I'm going to Milwaukee. What does that look like? And then he said that he spoke with Terry Stotts, and there's a level of comfort there. He spoke with Giannis. He bumped into Khris Middleton. Adrian Griffin had a conversation with him. And then all of a sudden, once he actually started to wrap his head around the idea of playing for this team, I think the easy realization for him to make was, I've never been in a position where I'm going into the season and the expectation is to win a title. He said that he always thought internally he could win in Portland, but now this is very different because everyone on the outside thinks that you can win, and he's never been in that position before. And I think that's why over the last 96 hours, he's started to realize, okay, this is a situation that whether or not it was my first choice, this is a situation now that's going to put me in the best position to win that I've ever been in.
Yeah. And, again, I think, again, it'll just be interesting to see kind of the adjustment period. And I mean, this is the upside of this happening so close to the start of the preseason, is that, we don't have to then spend the rest of the summer just sort of talking in abstract terms about what this could look like. I think we've had enough conversations, enough discussion about like Giannis and Dame pick and roll. It's like, all right, like it should be great on paper.
Yes, yes.
But as Giannis and Dame kind of alluded to, that from the conversation they had, I think Giannis's point was, yeah, this should be great, but now it's about the work, right? And that's obviously something that is kind of unifying for them. I thought it was interesting. Robin Lopez cracked me up with his availability. I think he was talking about reading a biography about Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, and then someone asked him what's allowed him to, stay in the NBA so long, and he said, his knowledge of Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall or something to that effect, and that just cracked me up. But he did have, and he had some, obviously, as anticipated, some little barbs for Brook. But I thought it was interesting. He said, people always like to ask about, like, well, who's the hardest working guy that you've seen in the NBA, and he said he's had the pleasure that he's obviously been around the league, played with tons of guys, and the kind of common refrain that he always comes back to is the Dame, Giannis, and Jimmy Butler, which was kind of interesting because it's like you kind of forget all the stops that Robin's had, but he did have that period where it must have been Chicago, where they overlapped. And so, yeah, it's interesting to kind of see the Robin Lopez with some nuggets of interesting wisdom in his piece too. But yeah, so I mean, we'll talk a little bit more like about some of the other conversations from other folks, but yeah, I mean, at this point, it's like, let's roll out the ball. Let's see kind of what these guys look like. And I think Giannis also referenced, as far as like the pick and roll and all that stuff. He was like, look, we don't know. Like, we got to watch film, right? Watch what guys did, how they played it in Portland. What did guys do well? What did work there? What's worked well for us, and then just go out and play and kind of understand. I thought it was funny. He talked about how, you can play with Khris and run pick and roll with Khris in his sleep, right? They just know each other so well. So we'll see how much of a kind of acclimation process there is, but hopefully, great players typically find a way pretty quickly. So hopefully it won't take long.
It should be no surprise with Giannis and Dame, as you pointed to, but there was definitely a sense of these guys already being very, very eager to get to work, which is fun. And I do wonder what it's going to look like in the preseason for this team. Around a week now until the preseason opens up. So as you pointed to, not too long for Bucks fans to wait, but let us know in the YouTube comments, what were your takeaways from Dame? There's plenty more. We're going to try and get through a few plays here. So there'll be lots to talk about in the YouTube chat there. We're going to get to Giannis next. He was, of course, asked about the contract extension and what this trade for Damian Lillard could mean for that. So we'll get to that after we talk about Ibotta. It is football season, so that means pizza, wings, maybe even some buffalo chicken dip as well. Whatever you prefer at your tailgate or on your couch, go all out and get cash back on every purchase with Ibotta. The weather is getting cooler. Don't tell Dame, but that means it's time to stock your closet with winter clothes. With Ibotta, you can get cash back on winter coats, hats, gloves, scarves, and more for the whole family. So you got to go shopping. It's a fact of life. You may as well get cash back on it as well, and you can do that with Ibotta. So download the Ibotta app now and use the code LOCK to start earning real cash back. Just go to the App Store or the Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app and use the code LOCKED. That's Ibotta, IBOTTA, in the Google Play or App Store, and use the code LOCKED. All right, coming up on Locked On Bucks tomorrow, I'm catching up with our friends over at Locked On Celtics. We've had a few crossover podcasts over the years, but John Corrales did reach out to me and say, hey, it might be time for us to have a chat. I'm sure there is a lot of optimism in that camp around Drew Holiday and what that could mean. So we're going to talk Bucks and Celtics tomorrow. And I have the prediction that the YouTube comments will be pretty fiery after we do that podcast. So I'm looking forward to that. Subscribe and turn the notifications on, and you'll know every single time we drop podcast. Let's get to Giannis, Frank. And we've kind of touched on the Dame stuff that he's discussed, but no question, if you're a Bucks fan now, you're saying, okay, well, the Bucks traded for Damian Lillard. You wanted Milwaukee to prove that you're a contender. That means you're signing an extension, right? Well, Giannis already said it's not going to happen this summer. I did have one quote that was more tongue-in-cheek and funny than anything, but I took this from Eric Name's Athletic Story, but the grab is online. He says, I don't remember where I said it, but I said it did not make sense to sign a contract right now because money isn't important, but a lot of effing money is important. And then he started laughing. So I'm going to sign it next year. He did go on to say that, hopefully the Bucks win a title this year. Then the decision maybe is a little bit easier. And he did say, hopefully the offer's on the table. Giannis, I can give you the tip now. I think the offer is going to be on the table. But what did you take from the contract stuff? Because clearly he had a laugh, as he always does. It was a pretty jovial contract discussion. But nothing changes. We know he's not going to sign it this year. But did you take anything of interest from those questions?
It's funny because I think if you can take some of his literal comments, and I would say it was also just generally a different vibe with the way that he was saying a lot of the same stuff. You could argue that in what he said previously over the past few weeks, but he was there was something about the tone behind it and just the energy in the room, which we talked about the other day, right? Like getting Dame sort of just completely flips, I think, the kind of overarching narrative from a media perspective and really changes the vibe in media day, right? From, we didn't really change anything other than the coach and, we got to impress Giannis to, well, we just showed the commitment to winning that, and Giannis acknowledged that, right? I mean, I think he said, let's just say this. I think the way that he framed the need for winning, a commitment to winning, was much more not skeptical, but I think it was much more of a show me type mindset sort of underlying the discussions that happened over the past month, the New York Times article and the 48 Minutes podcast. Here, I think it was he acknowledged, right, that he acknowledged that his teammates, that there wasn't anything that his teammates had done in the last couple of years, something like that inspired that commitment thing, right? It was not intended as a shot at everyone. Now, again, right, you never know. Maybe there was something on his mind there, and he's just kind of making sure that he plays nice. But I think the vibe around the team, I don't think it's been complete. I wouldn't say it's been completely turned around, because I think if you actually spent time with the Bucks over the past couple weeks, like before the trade, I would be shocked if there was angst with, Khris and Brook and Giannis and all the role players and all those guys. Something tells me those guys were business as usual, regardless of what the national media may have been talking about with Giannis and, speculating about, like pick packages that might get him a year from now if he decides he wants to leave, right? Like I don't think that was necessarily in the building anyway, but and this was alluded to by multiple people throughout the day. I think there is value in disrupting things a little bit and shaking things up a little bit. And Giannis has talked obviously about not wanting to feel comfortable, and I think he kind of alluded to that today again as well. Like, if you're just sort of in the same place, I think Dame did as well, right? You kind of get comfortable just being in your same place year after year after year after year, right? And so I think if Giannis was letting us into some of his thoughts around why he might move, or why he might want to leave over the past few weeks, I'm sure part of it was the idea that, like, the Bucks have been steady and kept the same group, and there's obvious upsides to that, but it's also, it means there's an opportunity for things to get stale, right? If you keep the same group and you don't win, then it gets stale. If you keep the same group and you win championships, then you're a dynasty, right? So yeah, I just think that there's an aspect of this acquisition that not only is it you're upgrading and getting the best player that Giannis has played with and putting him into the mix there, but you're just changing the energy around the team and kind of refreshing things, right? Which is not a shot at Drew or something like that by any stretch. It's just again, and it's not change for change's sake, right? We see teams kind of change things up just to change things up. This was intended to make the team better, raise their ceiling, and again, now we'll see them kind of roll the ball out. And I've been sort of thinking about it a little bit. I think I think in a lot of ways, the off season is about, making the big moves to raise your ceiling as a team. And sometimes, that means also smaller moves, right? Complementary moves. But in some ways it's like, you kind of try to raise your ceiling in the off season, and then you kind of start playing the actual games. You see, do role players pan out? Do young guys develop? What does it look like with the group together? And then based on that, right, you can, kind of shore up role players, rotation spots. If you can't play a certain way and you think you might need to, right, you can kind of do some things during the season, whether it's through trades or buyouts or whatever it might be, to try to address that and tweak it, right? But you're not, again, the history of teams making massive trades and then winning championships, I mean, it pretty much doesn't really happen, right? Like you can find random examples, like the Rockets acquiring Clyde Drexler in '95 at the trade deadline and then winning a championship, but that's pretty rare, right? Like normally the big moves that get made, they have to happen in the offseason if you're going to win because of it. And we've seen that ourselves, right? With Drew Holiday and the first Drew Holiday trade and winning a championship after that move. So, yeah, I don't know that Giannis said anything that was really that different, but I think just the, kind of, you took some of the kind of literal comments he made as you kind of read them off. You can sort of take that in a more positive light. And then just, again, I think just the energy and the acknowledgement of commitment that he made, I think, again, even if it's not a vast departure or, some sort of guarantee that he's going to sign an extension in a year, I think, again, it has just contributed to sort of this flipping of the narrative.
I don't know what it would have exactly looked like if this trade didn't go down, but it did feel like there was probably a significant edge taken away from media day if the trade didn't happen, because there would have been different context to what's gone on over the last few weeks. And you mentioned whether it's finding comfort, but getting stale. Bored is probably the most aggressive word I would use. And we've had so many discussions on this podcast in the last couple of regular seasons about how difficult is it to be motivated in December, January, early Feb in some of these games. I think that's going to be taken away this year because there is new players in the roster. The Bucks are going to want to start the season well, and they're going to want to find that chemistry. So I think it also makes the beginning of this season so fascinating. And at some point down the road, Frank, I want to talk to you about the idea of pressure for this team. There would have been pressure anyway, but I wonder if it's elevated or what it all looks like for this team if things don't start well in the regular season. But we'll get time to talk about that. I want to talk about Khris Middleton next, because I think he was a fascinating player. We haven't heard a lot from him over the last few months. We know he had off-season surgery. So let's get to Khris Middleton next. I've got some bad news for some of our listeners, Frank. I've had a few comments over the last few days along the lines of, well, thank goodness. Now we don't need to hear you talk about how important Khris Middleton is to this team. I'm sorry to say, Khris Middleton is still incredibly important to this team, and the health of Khris Middleton could be the thing that helps get this Bucks team over the top when it gets to postseason basketball. So he is still a critical player for the Milwaukee Bucks this season. One quote that I found interesting, he was asked specifically about the knee and the surgery that he had, and he referenced the fact that we remember when he came back around Feb for that second comeback that he had, I believe it might have been late January. And the Bucks went on a massive run to end the season. But he also referenced the fact that the team had already decided and they already knew that halfway through the season, around that time when he came back, that he was going to need surgery. It just wasn't an injury that was getting better. And I think that's an interesting tidbit to know, because I think if you're looking for upside for this team, clearly Damian Lillard, some of the other pieces, we talk about Beauchamp, we're hoping there. But if Khris Middleton is healthy, which he clearly hasn't been for the last 18 months, that is a significant boost for this Milwaukee Bucks team. So almost hearing the fact that they knew the whole time that he needed surgery, I can be looking for positives wherever I want to look for him. But it almost made me think, okay, he's had an extended offseason here. Here we go. We might be looking at the healthiest Khris Middleton we've seen over the last couple of years anyway. That's certainly what you're hoping for if you're a Bucks fan.
Yeah, and just one note as well. So I feel like I'm like the walking injury file on Khris Middleton, but Khris Middleton, the injury that he had against the Bulls in the playoffs 2 years ago, that was his left knee. Okay, the MCL injury the surgery, he never had surgery on that knee. The surgery this summer was on his right knee, which is the knee that he had surgery on in college, and which has been sort of this knee, he's talked about last year that, he kind of always has to like manage it and ramp it up during off seasons to kind of get it ready. And, I think there was talk that I heard some stray talk around the All-Star break last year. I think Khris had missed a game, I think right around leading into the All-Star break, about, like, oh, is he going to need like surgery to wear some, remove some loose bodies, right? Like one of those type things, like a cleanup. Obviously they didn't do that, right? He was able to play through the rest of the season in the playoffs. And, again, like obviously, defensively you could see he was, not what he wanted to be in the playoffs, but offensively, scored really efficiently. Of course, we wish, he could have made some buckets in fourth quarters along with everybody else on the team, but 60% true shooting or whatever it was on 24, points per game. I mean, Khris gave you about as much as you probably could have hoped going into the playoffs. So, so to hear him saying like, hey, I just feel great, I don't feel the pain anymore, is really encouraging, because obviously anytime there's a surgical procedure on a knee, there's two ways to look at it, right? There's the glass half full of like, oh, great, it was bothering him and now it's taken care of and now he's going to be in a better place. That's certainly, that aligns with what we heard from Khris today. But the flip side, obviously you can be paranoid, cynical about it and say, well, geez, here we go, surgery. All right, what did they do? What did they clean up? Right? You start cleaning up, then what do you have left? Are they taking away cartilage, shaving, meniscus? What exactly are they doing in there to kind of alleviate the issue? So so again, I will be an optimist. I will say, glass half full. It was interesting. I don't recall any questions for Giannis about his knee and his surgery, which, like I would have been curious to hear like how that sort of impacted, his off season and kind of what he was trying to do from a developmental standpoint, just recovery standpoint. Cause I mean, he's never had surgery for anything in his life. So that was a new thing. He was obviously, it's not like he was like on crutches for any like extended period, right? He was in China like a week or two afterwards, walking around with just a wrap on it. So, so it'd be interesting. I hope we at some point hear Giannis maybe provide some perspective on, how that changed his summer plan and kind of what he did from a, skill perspective. Right. But, we also know, if you ask Giannis how he's doing, he'll tell you he feels, 100%, and he'll never acknowledge any sort of injury that's like hurting him. Like he always feels great, right? His leg could be falling off, and he feels great, right?
Just another quick note here. Brook Lopez, who you referenced, and Robin Lopez did say that he was glad Brook didn't win Defensive Player of the Year, so he didn't have to hear about it. But Brook Lopez did speak about the idea that he always wanted to stay in Milwaukee. And I think, as we discussed what the contract extension would look like for Brook Lopez or a new contract as a free agent, I think we all just decided that he was at the point in his career, coming off the surgery that he had, that he deserved to be paid. And I think it was just the process there of you had another team that was willing to offer him a significant amount of money, and the Bucks had to come to the party because this is maybe the last big contract Brook's going to get. But I think ultimately, based on what we know about him and how much fun he seemed to have in Milwaukee over the last 5 years, I don't think it was a surprise to hear him talk about wanting to come back to Milwaukee. But going through the business part of things for the first time in a little while for him, and I thought it was much deserved.
Yeah, and I mean, there wasn't any drama about his previous contract, right? He signed that 4-year, $52 million deal, which, even with the cap at the time being much lower than it was now, I mean, that was, even when he signed that, right, it was kind of like, man, if he continues to be the guy that we just saw in that first year make that huge impact, this feels like a bargain, right? So, yeah, I mean, you can't begrudge Brook getting paid, right? It's a 2-year deal, right? So I mean, from like a risk perspective, there's not a whole lot of risk. And I mean, look at the Celtics with Al Horford, right? Al Horford's a couple years older than Brook and has continued to sort of defy age and expectations. Obviously play, slightly different types of games, but again, just Brook is just one of those guys. Like, I think when we look back on this, we try to acknowledge it sort of in the moment while we were watching this team each year, but such a unique combination of offensive skill, like just like the shots, those weird, step back, slow motion jumpers that he makes from mid range, the touch he has around the basket, and then obviously the defense, which we always, I think, probably acknowledge and talk about. To do all those things, and then on top of it, just be this like super lovable stand-up guy, super smart. Again, I don't know what Robin's gonna be for this team role-wise, but hey, Robin Lopez telling jokes, delivering quotes. I'm at least gonna enjoy that, and having those two guys together again is a lot of fun. So yeah, just an A+ dude, and hopefully we get another couple years to cement Brook Lopez's eventual jersey retirement. Hard to believe he's been here 5 years already, right? I mean, it's like he showed up when Bud did, 5 years here. Obviously, the 1 year marred by injuries, but remarkably durable otherwise. And knock on wood, he'll continue to do that, and hopefully continue to be obviously a huge part of what this team is, and again, how they succeed at the highest levels.
I mentioned Brook Lopez surgery. Hopefully Khris Middleton went to the same surgeon, because it seemed to work well for Brook Lopez last year, and we'll see how the health looks there. All right, we've hit most of the main players here and some of the major talking points from Media Day today, but let us know if there's anything else you want us to talk about, or any other thoughts you had if you were able to sit down at home and watch the live stream. It's always a pretty exciting day, particularly when you've got some new players in the building there. So that's Bucks Media Day in the books. Make sure you subscribe and get involved in the conversation wherever you listen or watch to the show. We appreciate it. Frank, you're on the road. I don't know where you are in America, but you are on the road somewhere, staying up late for Locked On Bucks. I'll chat to you later this week for sure. Bucks and Celtics crossover tomorrow. That'll have the people fired up. We look forward to that, but we'll leave it there, and we'll speak to you all tomorrow.